The wave of gangster rap in Sweden makes it seem like the gang problem has arrived in the country pretty much out of nowhere during the 2010s. And while to a certain extent you could argue that that's the case, the roots of the gang problems in Sweden go arguably much further into the past. Some concerns towards the social problems brewing in the Swedish suburbs have been discussed even internationally as far back as the 90s. For example, there's a 1998 article in the New York Times highlighting the ghettoization of a Stockholm suburb called Rinkeby, a place where the brutal gang war that we later discuss in this video actually begun. This was an article which ended with a bizarre romanticization of the hood, where a child would actually explain that the children all had stories about how their parents wouldn't let them party in Rinkeby and just how interesting they feel life is in these areas. Interestingly, some years later, in 2005, as France was dealing with large riots in their troubled suburbs, French newspapers were presenting Rinkeby as a model example for countries like France to follow. However, perhaps nobody could have predicted just how much things would later escalate, particularly during the 2010s. The Swedish police in 2019 would estimate that there were around 30,000 gang members and affiliates in the country. Now, for context, in the UK, the country which is most often discussed when talking about a gang problem in Europe, there were approximately 33,500 so-called professional gang members in 2018. Now, this was considered to be a pretty large number, and according to The Guardian, this meant that there were more gangsters in Britain than in all three big Italian-American mafia families. But if you take a step back and account for the fact that the UK's population is about 6 times the size of Sweden's, the numbers there become much more alarming. Statistics show that lethal violence in Sweden has also been steadily increasing since the early 2010s, but the somewhat moderate increase shown in this statistic tells only part of the problem. What makes the situation more alarming is that while other types of homicides have actually decreased, which has been a common progression in Europe, gun homicides in particular have grown so much that the overall trend of violence in Sweden has been increasing, with gun-related deaths actually tripling between 2012 and 2020, taking Sweden from the very bottom of Europe's gun violence rankings to the very top. And now, only Albania, a country with decades-long issues with guns and deadly feuds that put the country ahead of even America in per capita gun deaths, leaving Albania as the only European country more deadly for gun crime than Sweden. But Albanian gangs, that's a whole other video. Again, to put Sweden's staggering number of guns in context, the Swedish police estimate that there are 3,000 illegal firearms in the country's capital of Stockholm alone, which is around 3 times the number of guns thought to be in London, which is a city around 10 times the population of Stockholm. And the per capita gun murder rate of the Swedish capital is about 30 times that of London. The great majority of the shootings in Sweden are connected to organised crime, with the new street gangs being largely to blame for this alarming increase. Particularly, statistics show how the rise in gun crime correlates with an increase in drug-related crime that most of the gangs apparently participate in. Moreover, the use of explosives by these gangs has also increased significantly, which has further resulted in numerous deaths, and horrific news stories that make Sweden seem like it's in a state of civil war.
I woke up at 4:40 from a proper blast, and it was one of those, rattling blasts, like...
In Sweden, a woman has died after what police believe may be the latest in a series of explosions linked to a gang war. Investigators say the 25-year-old victim was a neighbour of the targeted premises and had no criminal links.
Police think a grenade attack in Sweden, which killed an 8-year-old boy, could be linked to a gang-related conflict. Yusuf Wasami from Birmingham in the UK died when a hand grenade was thrown through the window of an apartment in Gothenburg.
Police in Sweden say a man has died after picking up a suspected hand grenade in Stockholm.
Swedish gangs have also been linked to shootings and murders in other countries like Denmark, Spain, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. And the gangs are also actively trying to establish their operations abroad on a more permanent basis, particularly in the neighbouring countries of Norway and Finland, where they likely have few rivals who could challenge them with equal levels of violence, as well as Spain, where supposed Swedish narcos have migrated there to be closer to their wholesale suppliers that allow them to maintain and grow their drug dealing operations. As the gangs have become an inescapable part of the Swedish society, the media has also begun to make increasingly detailed reports about them, including dedicated sites like this one from the Swedish public service media company SVT, where each gang is presented in great detail. It's almost like a corporate version of Reddit's Chiracology sub, which documents the daily goings-on among Chicago gang and drill communities. This particular site lists 29 gangs that have at least some operations in the greater Stockholm area, with some of the most well-known ones that we'll be discussing in this video being 2015, the Death Patrol, a gang that hails from the suburb of Rinkeby in northwest Sweden, a name which was first given to the gang by the media, as seen in shocking reporting on the group being suspected of committing as many as 10 murders. The original members of the Death Patrol apparently called themselves 3MST, with the name being derived from the names of their most prominent members. 3 being 3M, referring to 3 founding members whose names begin with M, Mohammed, aka Makan or Makalele, Mustafa, aka Musa, and Masla, aka Hajud. The S stands for Zachariah, aka Shobra, and the T for Abdisamed, aka Talang, with some suggesting that the name 3MST actually stands for the Three Musketeers. But later, the abbreviation DP for Death Patrol would become a common name used to refer to the gang in internal Sweden. The Death Patrol formed in 2015, but has now been largely replaced by a new generation who have been given the new name the Hulster Children, referring to another suburb near Rinkeby. This new generation of the gang has also been referred to as the Death Patrol 2.0, or YDP, meaning Young Death Patrol, with this formatting actually borrowing a common UK gang tradition using the letter Y to refer to a younger generation of a famous gang. And shockingly, it wouldn't take long for news reports to suggest that the Death Patrol 2.0 was quickly becoming one of Stockholm's most violent groups. And now, in direct opposition to the Death Patrol, you have the Shottaz, another gang from Rinkeby, infamous for their deadly feud with the Death Patrol that goes all the way back to 2015. This gang likely got its name from the classic 2002 gangster movie Shottaz, which depicts 2 guys from the hard streets of Kingston, Jamaica, migrating to Miami in search for a better life. Some of the main names that have been associated with the Shottaz are the brothers Far and Faye, aka Frankie, as well as Faisal, aka Indiana, A, Poi, Gucci, Hoods, and the rappers Yasin, formerly Yasin Bin, and Jafar Bin. Like the Death Patrol, the Shottaz also have a younger generation who go by the name FLG, or Filterlösa Grabbar, which translates to something like the filterless guys, suggesting that in the streets, they truly have no filter. Later, the FLG would also have a split where some of the members would start a new gang called SSA, or Same Side Always. Now, as mentioned previously, there's another gang called the Dalsen Network, which was allegedly the first gang that the rapper Einar became associated with as a youngster through a friend of his called Packy. That's his name, don't cancel me for that. At the time, this gang was likely operating mainly in the projects of an area called Dalen, including the suburbs around Enskede-Dalen, where Einar grew up, and the neighbouring Bagarmosen. However, recently, the gang has allegedly begun heavily expanding their operations across the country, leading to a violent turf war with another criminal group called the Foxtrot Network. That war reportedly begun in the city of Sundsvall. Allegedly, the gang's expansion has recently come under the leadership of a fresh-faced 25-year-old kingpin by the name of Mikhail the Greek Tenezos. Tenezos has a warrant out for his arrest and is assumed to currently reside abroad, but his location is unknown. Now, the Dalsen Network also has several rappers associated with the gang, including Thrife, aka Thrife Jack, who hails from the suburb of Enskede-Dalen and can be seen hanging out with Einar in the projects of Dalen in Einar's first music video. There is also Haval, who hails from the suburb of Skarpnäck, which is located near Enskede-Dalen, who can even be seen here posting with the former leader of the Dalsen Network, Mario Golzarmia, who is currently imprisoned for the kidnapping of Einar, among other serious charges. However, Haval has also been connected with another gang who are allied with the Dalsen, the Vårby Network. The Vårby Network hails from the western outskirts of Greater Stockholm, unsurprisingly, a suburb called Vårby Gård. The gang was allegedly founded by a man named Chihab Lamauri sometime in the late 2000s or early 2010s. According to the police, Lamauri is a strong leader who had organized the gang like a mafia with a strict vertical leadership structure. Besides Haval, the gang has been associated with the popular rapper Sikan, who often hangs out in Vårby Gård in his music videos. This gang has had over a decade-long conflict with another gang from the same area called the May Network. This conflict stems from the early 2010s when there was another gang in the area called VYG, or Vårby Young Gangsters. Although it's not clear if this was an actual criminal organization or just a fragmented group of out-of-control youngsters, what is known is that one of their members, named Mekil Jokana, was indeed serious about making a name for himself in the criminal underworld. In 2011, Jokana was shot in Vårby, but would fortunately survive, and it was rumoured that Lamauri's group was behind the shooting, which may have had something to do with territorial disputes regarding drug dealing. According to the local police, from this point forward, the Vårby Network, led by Lamauri, and the May Network, founded by Jokana, were in serious conflict which would only escalate as time went on. After Jokana had been targeted in several assassination attempts, one of them injuring his wife and killing his friend, he would go on a retaliation mission that would become one of the biggest news stories in Sweden at the time. On the 2nd of August 2020, Jokana and his 2 accomplices would drive to a gas station with the aim of shooting members of the Vårby Network, but instead, they would end up killing an innocent 12-year-old girl who was just out walking her dog. This tragic event caused a public uproar, and eventually the men were found and arrested. And during the investigation, the police would also uncover that the murder weapon, an AK-47 AK-47 had actually been used in a music video by an affiliated rapper called Tenan, who himself had ties to the May network. The music video, which was for a song called Blue Cheese, has since been removed from the internet, and Tenan would end up receiving a 4-year sentence for the illegal weapon. Initially, it appeared that the Vårby Network would largely escape the situation scot-free, but soon it turned out that they were in fact suspects in another case that would end up making even more headlines. But more about that later on in the story. Together, the gangs discussed here have been part of some of the most brazen gang wars that have devastated Sweden's streets in the past few years, as well as blurring the lines between music and real-life organised crime in a way that has rarely been seen in Europe before. So now you know the key players and organisations that run the streets of Sweden, it's time to begin our deep dive into the violent streets of Sweden and the music that represents them. Going back almost 10 years to the Stockholm suburb of Rinkeby, where one dispute between childhood friends would ultimately lead to years of bloodshed that would eventually spread from the small suburb in the outskirts of Stockholm all the way beyond Sweden's borders, and in the process, launching the career of one of Sweden's most popular rappers.